Dating back to the days of segregation where they had all Mexican schools, the thinking at the time was Mexicans cannot assume these positions, cannot be educated, and cannot move into professions.
The conditions in the schools in the 60s were pretty deplorable.
The educational process of Mexican Americans for over 20 years in East Los Angeles and throughout the Southwest has been disrupted by its failure to communicate with the Mexican American. That is the disruption. When 57% of the students at Garfield drop out year after year, there has to be a problem. We're not operating in a vacuum. There's social injustice.
So Lincoln Heights was a blue-collar working class community, just like Boyle Heights, a lot of similarities, right? I mean, Boyle Heights is just, what, 10 blocks away. And the social problems that existed at the time also existed in Lincoln Heights. The racism, the discrimination, the high dropout rates, the military recruiting people for the Vietnam War.
The thinking at the time was Mexicans cannot assume these positions, cannot be educated, and cannot move into professions. They cannot be trained in that way, right? They can use their hands. They can be, productive in other ways through vocational education programs. And that was the thinking back when they were segregating our community into all Mexican schools, which happened up until 1947. It was the law. It was allowed. It was de jure. You could be put into an all-Mexican school because you had a Spanish surname, you were dark-skinned, or you spoke Spanish. They profiled you. The schools profiled you, and they put you into all-Mexican schools.
You were labeled educationally, mentally retarded, EMR. A lot of my friends ended up in those classes. I get a little emotional about this right now because a lot of them were able to get out of it, right? What did that mean? Retarded, that was such a harsh label. But to be labeled that, at least you had the knowledge that you could probably work your way out of it and prove to them you weren't retarded. But think about the stigma that was going to follow you for the rest of your life, at least for that semester, being called educationally mentally retarded. These were the tracks that I remember. Not so much the wood shop and the metal shop and the manual arts, it was those labels that stuck to a lot of people.
And asking about the possibility of attending college. And I was turned off. And she just passed away, in fact, the counselor. Her response was, well, I'm going to lunch. I just don't have time right now. So that kind of turned me off because it took a lot of nerve on my part to just even ask.
So we did a survey. It was probably a pretty simple yes/no survey. And we distributed among our friends. Then we got them back and met again and realized that no one had been talked to about college. Other students were feeling the same way we did, feeling belittled. People complained about the cafeteria food, the overcrowded classrooms, not having any resources, etc. So again, being good students that we were, we said, well, we need to tell people about this. So that's when we took all the information that we had gathered, primary information from the students, and we started talking to our principals and counselors and teachers and parents and got nowhere.
But the other thing that went on back then that was more subtle is that students would drop out and would just disappear and we wouldn't see them anymore. So when I started here, my class, which was a winter class, so I graduated in January, I don't know if they still have that today. There were about 300 of us that started off in my winter class, and only half were still here when we graduated.
Walkouts were a mass protest by students supported by the community and organizations to demand quality education, to say we've had enough of the racist school system, and we presented a series of demands.
And Sal Castro came in February of 1968 to a UNUMAS meeting, and he was asking students to help the high school students who were planning the demonstration, right? And our students sort of melted around that, and people like Montezuma Esparza and Susan Racho and Al Juarez.
Well, I was already a freshman at UCLA when the walkouts occurred, so no, I didn't walk out. I ran through the halls here yelling walk out so other students could walk out.
We knew we were going to walk out, but we needed to really lean on one another, because one person walking out wasn't going to make change, but it had to be all of us, and luckily a lot of us did. I proudly share with you today that I was afraid. I was fearful. I was 16, I was 17, a lot of us were kids. My brothers were in the schools, the junior and senior high school. They were 13 and 14.
There were several layers of organizing going on in the 2-year period before the actual walkout. So you have to remember, we didn't start out saying we're planning a walkout. We all started out saying we're going to make these schools better. But after not being listened to by so many people, we had to do something. We could have given up and walked away, but no pun intended. But we decided we needed to do something. So I realized the inequity in schools when Mr. Castro took us to visit Fairfax High School, which was on the west side of LA, which is, had just been built and was absolutely beautiful. And just such night and day compared to Lincoln, compared to our high schools, and visiting the library and just seeing every shelf was full of books. Lincoln's library didn't have a lot of books. And it just like hit me with a ton of bricks, and asking questions about why. And also I kind of realized it had to do with class too. Class. I never knew I was poor until probably then, because of course that neighborhood that school was in was vastly different from the neighborhoods I was used to, and it was a much smaller world then. I hadn't been past downtown by the, when I was 16, 17, probably more than 3 or 4 times, literally. So just seeing that really hit me.
We ran in and ran up and down the hallway here of this is the main building, the administration building, yelling, "Waka, waka!" And I had dark glasses, a beard, and a beret. And then the administrators came out and started telling, "What are you doing? You can't do that. Who are you?" And I said, "You know what? Leave us alone. This is serious business. We're here to organize the walkout. This is it." And they kept telling us, "You can't be here. You have to leave." And we just said, "Just leave us alone. It's happening." And teachers and students came out and said, "This is it. This is it. We're doing the walkout." Oh, yes, this is it. The walkout. Let's do it. So hundreds and thousands of students started walking out of this building and other buildings out the front gates into Broadway. It was beautiful, it was exhilarating, all chanting, walk out, walk out. Went out to Broadway, started marching up and down the street, right? So by the time we got to Roosevelt, they had locked up the gates with chains, so we couldn't get in.
I was in a classroom, and I did observe the actual walkout students leaving campus through the back gate. I was, because our building was cafeteria building, and we were right next to that back gate, and that's where I saw the kids break the fence open. The principal was out, of course, trying to keep everybody in. And I just saw, I did see an egg fly over and just hit him on the head. That I did see. And everybody just spilled out on Mott Street. And that's when the officers were out there waiting for those students.
And we saw all the students coming to the gate pushing it, like, yeah, they couldn't get out. So we went up to the gate and said, what are we doing? Well, they got a chain, okay. And then the students threw out a rope, a big old rope that they use for gymnastics. And they tied it and they threw us the other side and they said, pull. I said, okay, we're gonna pull on this side. So me and a couple other bombers started pulling it, and they're on the inside were pushing it. And I'm talking about hundreds of students packed, pushing. And it went on for a couple of minutes, and I go, oh man, this thing's not gonna break. And we just kept pushing, and all of a sudden, bam, the chain broke, or the lock broke, and then the gate jumped open, and all these students walked out.
While we were walking out here, there were about 1,500 of half the school walked out from Lincoln. The numbers weren't as big, but they were big enough at Garfield, Roosevelt, Belmont, and Wilson. But because each school had a different dynamic going on, it wasn't just like the same for all of us. The police reaction was different at each school too.
I saw a cone on the street. I picked up the cone and I started shouting walkout as I climbed onto a car. And I could see the sheriffs forming lines, preventing more students from coming to our side, and holding back brown berets. And I began to sense that it started to get dangerous.
Students got hurt, they got beat up, and as I mentioned at Roosevelt, the police were waiting for them outside the gates as students climbed the fence trying to get out. At Garfield, same thing happened, except it was not the LAPD as it was at Roosevelt, because it's on the county side. We had the county sheriffs who were waiting for the students. Same thing at Wilson, you had LAPD. And I don't think it was quite as violent at Wilson as it was at Garfield and at Roosevelt. But Belmont High School, which isn't even really technically on the east side, but it was part of our effort, and there were students part of our organizing, and a lot of Chicano students at Belmont. The police didn't wait for them outside the gates or outside the doors. They actually went inside the school, into the hallways to Belmont, and beat the kids and arrested them. The administration opened the doors for the cops to come in.
I was assigned to being in the background, be ready to get people out of jail. I was the treasurer, I had the money, I had the checkbook. So it was an interesting time. It wasn't the following day or a sequence of days that people were arrested. It was much later that people were arrested. The 13 were arrested, and then we had to act in terms of bailing them out.
We could see on the street police were already there. We also saw community activists known as the Brown Berets. And we also saw a scattering of a support system.
It's the police action and what the police, how the police were violent with regards to their treatment of students that were walking out. You don't see that in newspapers. You didn't see that in the news on television in 1968. All of that seemed to disappear.
I realized how lucky I was that here at Lincoln we didn't have that same violence, you know, and we owe them a lot. There were people who got hurt. Students got arrested and then released, you know, so they weren't part of the 13 who ended up getting indicted for conspiracy, like Sal Castro and Moctezuma Esparza.
I remember the principal, Ingalls, who was a really pleasant, affable guy. He was a really pleasant guy that was friendly. After the walkouts occurred, I remember him saying that it was terrible that the pastoral passivity of the students had been destroyed. Now that's a really interesting phrase, pastoral passivity. Right? So the idea was that it was very peaceful on this campus. And there wasn't a lot of pushing for anything. There wasn't any sense of outrage at the fact that we were getting basically an inferior education.
The Chicano movement, it sparked a real moment of cultural pride, ethnic and cultural pride and community activism. More importantly, it really encouraged us as a people to see ourselves differently, to go beyond what we were taught that we could do, what we should be doing. And we saw numbers, college-going numbers really, really increase. Because until then, the whole world had defined us as a bunch of poor Chicano kids from East LA who were destined to be the next generation of cheap labor. But we all knew at that moment we deserved it. We deserved better than that.
Sal Castro was instrumental and pivotal to giving us that light to know there was a brighter future out there. There was a life outside of these walls that we were surrounded in.
And that was Sal Castro's thing. I'm doing this now, I'm acting now, but the beneficiaries are going to be those that come after me. Those that come after me. And that's his legacy.
To acknowledge the efforts that were made then, to not let that have been in vain, to pursue an education, to go forward. Because there was a lot of work put into it, a lot of hope, a lot of love, a lot of coraje to get the message out, to get an education.
Our people, the Chicanas have a long history of struggle. If you look at every decade in the past, there's been people, young people, families who have fought for justice. So the walkouts was our generation of the Chicano Power Movement. I'm still active today. So I challenge you to be active in your community today, in your school, in your community, or wherever you work. Organize and fight for justice and fight for the equality of the Chicano people. Thank you.
The walkouts represented us taking our lives into our own hands and us saying that we had power and that we could make a difference and that we could demand and take and make justice happen.
I did two things I'm really proud of. I graduated from Cal State LA with a degree in social work. And 40 years after the walkouts, 40 years after I saw Yoli and Paula and all my friends graduate on that football field, I watched from the stands. I watched them graduate, and I sat there with their parents. My parents were not there. Why would they want to watch their kids sit in the stands, right? Well, 40 years later, on that same football field that Yoli and Paula graduated in cap and gown, I got to walk cap and gown, graduate with the class of 2008 here at Lincoln High School. That was one of the proudest moments in my life.